And it's 8:09, and we have a special guest on the line, Dr. Taz Walker. Good morning.
Good morning, Mick. It's great to be with you today.
And it's great to have you here, and I've just got a frog in my throat. What great timing.
For the technical issue.
Yes, what great timing. Now, Dr. Taz Walker is from creation.com, and of course, Dr. John's not in this morning. Dr. Taz Walker will be with us instead, and Dr. Taz Walker is a geologist. He has a Bachelor of Engineering and honours and a doctorate in mechanical engineering. Dr.
That's
Taz
right.
Walker, can you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, so I didn't start out as a geologist. I trained as an engineer. I used to, as a kid, I always liked to find out how things worked. I think a lot of blokes are like that and make things and break things. I don't know if that's been other people's experience. But when I came to know Jesus as my saviour, that changed a whole lot of my aspects in my life, and I wanted to know how it all fitted together. I love to hear stories and get information about facts and figures and how the Bible connected with the real world. But the issue of creation and Genesis 1 it was a real puzzle to me. I remember reading through Genesis 1 and trying to compare it with a geological map, a geological chart, and I couldn't figure out how it fitted together. And the millions of years on the chart and the days on Genesis 1, and it was just very puzzling. Until I was in my 20s, when I found out about a book called The Genesis Flood by Whitcomb and Morris, and that really showed me that I was looking in the wrong place. For Genesis 1 is not where the geological column basically applies. It does apply there, but it's not primarily there. What we see is the effects of Genesis 6, 7, and 8, the global flood of Noah. And so that really made the lights go on for me. And that prompted me to ultimately go back and go to university and study geology as a mature age student.
So you were a Christian as a young man?
As a young man in my early teens, I came to the Lord, and that changed a lot of things. Makes a difference knowing the Lord, doesn't it? It's really, really good.
Yes, and in your case, it caused you to ask those questions that got you to go to uni in the first place.
That's right. And so I after I read that book by The Genesis Flood by Whitcomb and Morris, I came across material, the magazine, Creation magazine, which was just getting underway. When was that? That was back in the late 70s when it was just starting up in Brisbane, and so I bought that, and then they had a technical magazine called, the Technical Journal. It used to be called, it's now called the Journal of Creation. And I'd read those, and I couldn't figure out, even though they were creationist publications, I could not figure out how that stuff fitted with the geological column, how the Noah's flood fitted. So what I did was I remember once just sort of with a scrap of paper thinking, well, what would you expect to find if the Bible's true, and if we start with the Bible, what would we expect to find with the geology? And I just, it was not very complicated, and I just worked out about you'd have rocks in creation, and you'd have a period between creation and the flood where not much happened, and then you'd have things with the flood, and then stuff after the flood. And I just figured that out, and it was really prompted by my wife wanting to go to New Zealand. That's sort of really what kicked it off, which is quite an interesting story. But in actual fact, she wanted to go to New Zealand before she was married. But I talked her into getting married, and she missed out on a trip to New Zealand, and she always wanted to have a trip. So we went to New Zealand after we'd been married a while and the kids were grown up. And when I was in New Zealand, we were on a coach touring around the place, and everywhere we went, the coach driver would say, millions of years ago this, and millions of years ago that, and he'd talk about just this evolutionary philosophy just all the time, which was just part of the commentary for the trip. And I thought, man, they really need to understand this from a biblical point of view. So that's what caused me. I wrote a summary of this little thing which I'd worked out on a scrap of paper, and I submitted it to it was called the International Conference on Creationism in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, they accepted it. They said, yeah, come along and present the paper. It was a big conference. And so I then had to write the paper, not having much geological experience, and I showed it to a guy where I worked. I worked in the electricity industry, and we designed power stations and all sorts of mechanical stuff I was involved in. And he looked at this report, and he came back and he said, "It's a good article." He said, "but nobody's ever going to take any notice of you." I said, "Why not?" He says, "Because you don't have any qualifications in geology." And I said, "Oh, yeah?" He says, "But you could get them. You could do it part-time." So that's what started me to go back as a mature age student to study geology. And then when I finished that, I ended up working with Creation Ministries, and it's been really wonderful. And I've become more and more confident in the Word of God and seeing it transform lives, seeing people who've been timid, the lights come on and they become confident. And we get a lot of people just that's talking about how the information that comes through creation.com and the geological information changes their whole outlook on the world.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Taz Walker, we'll be back very shortly. It is 8:16. We've got Ann Wilson with My Jesus coming up next. And, of course, lots more from Dr. Taz Walker. So if you do have any questions, please send them through. Send them through to our text line, 9. It's 20 minutes past 8. And we're on the line to Creation Ministries International, Dr. Taz Walker this morning. And Dr. Taz Walker is an amazing man. He's done a Bachelor of Science in Engineering, and he's also a mechanical engineer. Was a mechanical engineer for some years before doing his, jumping into geology, going to uni a little bit later in life, and finishing a Bachelor of Science in Geology. Is that what you'd call it, Dr. Taz?
Yeah, that's a good description. Yep, that is.
And a question I have for you is sort of going back to uni after years and having faith. First, it's interesting listening to you guys from Creation Ministries. Some guys, that we've been speaking to in recent months, becoming Christians after going to uni and after questioning what's really going on, and as they're learning, sort of going, hey, that doesn't fit with reality. And in your case, you were already a Christian, a man of faith, and then you've gone back to do geology. How did you find it? Did you find it difficult with the, your lecturers telling you about the millions and billions of years, and you being in a position where you're thinking, it doesn't fit with my theology?
Yeah, so to start with, when I went back, I was a little bit nervous that I might discover something which I couldn't explain. There were things that I've become much more confident since I've finished the course and since I've been working with Creation Ministries. But at that time, I was a little bit nervous about what I'd uncover and whether there'd be things I couldn't explain. But I found it was really, really interesting time. I was actually older than most of the other students. The other students were younger than my kids. So I was there, and sometimes people who were coming around from lecture theatre to lecture theatre to give out notices or to make an announcement, they'd come to see me. They'd ask me if they could give a notice, and I'd say, no, I'm just the student. That guy over there in the t-shirt and the shorts and the sneakers, he's the lecturer. so that was quite interesting. But it was very, very good to get this information from these guys, the lecturers. They tended not to want to talk about it. I thought they might get into some discussions and that, but generally speaking, they didn't want to talk about it. And the only time we sometimes had a conversation was when we were on a field trip out in the country, and guys had been drinking, and it loosened up their vocal cords, and there might be a conversation about it then. But basically, they didn't want to go down that route.
Why do you think they didn't want to talk about it?
I really don't know. I think maybe they thought it was stupid. It was so stupid it wasn't worth spending the time of day on or anything, something like that. They might have thought that. But there was occasionally a little interesting thing which would happen in the class, like one guy, a nice guy that was the lecturer there, and he was talking about these volcanoes in the middle of the ocean, and they call them the volcanic vents, the mid-ocean vents, they'd call them. And he says, and he was going on about it, and he's saying, and this is where, that it could very well be that this could be where life originated, at this place here. And he's talking to the class, and then he looks at me and he says, "You don't believe me, do you?"
Yes, he knew
which
there
was
was
very
something
interesting. And so it was a very interesting time, and I had no idea what I was going to do after I finished. I just felt that the Lord wanted me to do it, and so I resigned my work, and I'm not sure what was going to happen after it happened, but it just so happened by an amazing providential circumstances that the CEO of Creation Ministries International, what it is now known as, we had the lunch together, and he said, would you like to come work with us? And I said, yeah, I'd like to. I didn't even know that you needed anybody to work for you. So that's how I started, and that was been quite an amazing journey.
Yes. So, of course, Creation Ministries does have a website as well. They've got thousands of pages of information on there. Creation.com is the website, and anyone can go there anytime. There's a search bar up in the top right-hand corner, and you can get almost any question answered. Like, you can come up with all sorts of stuff. They talk about, dinosaurs and aliens and, of course, creation and evolution. And, I guess whilst you can get all your questions answered there, we'd really appreciate if you have any questions, well, in this case, in particular, around maybe engineering or geology, because that's Dr. Taz Walker's expertise. We'd love you to send those questions through to our text line, 0401 949 949. I was worked that time, but I wasn't meant to play. Don't know how or why that happened. I think it's that little mouse in the system, Micro Mouse. He comes and plays with these buttons all the time. Anyway, we're with Dr. Taz Walker from Creation Ministries International, and he's been talking to us this morning a little bit about his journey. And good morning, Dr. Taz. Great to have you on.
Good morning, Mick. It's good to be here. Great to be here. 94.9.
And you're on with us this morning. We're having a very interesting morning with our technology this morning, which is quite exciting. But, of course, your expertise is not with technology, it's with geology, which is a little bit different to technology. However, you've spent some time teaching people, I believe, about some geological stuff.
Yeah, that's right. So actually it was not long after I started with Creation Ministries, only within a few weeks, that they had a camp in New Zealand, and they wanted me to run a geological field trip, which is quite interesting. Hit the ground running, which is very good. So I was up in Auckland, and I had to check all the geological maps and things like that. And so people loved it. People would come out and we'd look at the rocks, we'd show the evidence for creation, the evidence for Noah's flood, and how the rock sort of gave that evidence. So people really loved it. It was out in the open, out in the sun, wind on your face. So people enjoyed that rather than being inside in a room.
And what sort of things were you looking at?
Well, we look at evidence like volcanic rocks, which point to being in place quickly, and also sedimentary rocks showing how they are formed, and evidence for large flows of water, and you can work out the direction of them, and you can work out how quick, something of how quickly they flowed, and then just piecing it all together into a story, showing how geologists work out a story from the rocks, and how you can make the story, you can use the Bible's history, particularly Noah's flood, and that you can use that history to frame your story, and realize it's not the rocks telling the story, it's the people telling the story, and how the story that framed with the history of the Bible, the true history of the world, how that actually matches what people can actually see with their eyes as they're walking around looking at the rocks. So that's very fascinating.
Now, I find when I look at the rocks and I see some of those layers, here on the Central Coast, we can drive down to the Hawkesbury River where, many years ago, the Road and Traffic Authority, they cut these giant cuttings into the freeway, and we can see these big, thick layers of sedimentary sandstone. It's very obvious to me that a layer that thick, I mean, they're hugely thick, must have happened quickly, because it's such a, well, I guess when you look at the layer, it looks like the exact same type of sand built into the sandstone, and it's meters thick. And I can't imagine that could happen in any small sort of flood, could it?
No, well, the thickness of the layer, and you see that, I think you come across a river somewhere, and as you just come across that and go up slight incline, these layers are alongside. There must be, it must be something like 30 or 50 metres high. Those cuttings are enormous, aren't they?
Yep.
But the thick layers, you said metres thick, I would say they might be something like 5 or 10 metres thick. Mm-hmm. And that indicates, you could get an idea for the amount of water that was flowing, bringing the sand in. It had to be like 10, 20 metres depth of water bringing the sand in. And not only that, it had to cover a huge area, because these sand layers, they cover an area like right from the coast all the way up through to the Blue Mountains. So you can see these layers of rock. And they're mined, and various layers, like that's the top layer, it's called the Hawkesbury sandstone. As you go underneath, you get into some of the coal measures, and the Newcastle coal measures, they've got them further north, and then those layers go down under Sydney, and then they come up again on the south in the Illawarra region, and the coal there. And so, it was an enormous, absolutely ginormous a flow of water that brought in vegetation, which caused which was dumped in, forming the coal and then the sand. And there's also volcanic rock which occurred at the same time, which were interlayered in there. And so the whole layer, I think it's about 5 kilometres thick. It's called the Sydney Basin, and it's amazing, absolutely amazing.
So there's no way that a small flood could have done that?
No, there's no way a small flood could have done that. And the Three Sisters, of course, in the Blue Mountains, they are part of the. It's not the Hawkesbury sandstone, but it's similar to the Hawkesbury sandstone. They are part of the Sydney Basin, sort of, and so there's a ginormous thing which goes from just north of Newcastle, way south of Kiama. So this huge area was deposited by lots of water, and geologists recognised that. And, one guy particularly notices that some of these layers of sand, they've got like they're a sand dune. They've actually folded back on themselves, and indicating that the water was flowing enormous speed, a huge velocity. Yep. And it was a water 250 kilometres wide, a wave of water. And of course, the mainstream geologists, their philosophy is, you have to use something which is slow and gradual, like what you see happening today. You don't see water flowing 250 kilometres wide like that. And so they come up with these rather creative ways of trying to explain it, which are quite far-fetched. But Noah's flood, that's exactly what you'd expect during Noah's flood. And it happened as the waters were rising on the earth, probably, I don't know, 2 months or 3 months after the flood started. A lot of things had happened, and it was as the waters were rising up, starting to get to reach a peak, when they reached their peak. So, I've done lots of geological field trips around Sydney, the area there, up into the Blue Mountains, and we did one, believe it or not, at Bondi Beach, which was a bit tricky, with all the people doing their swimming and sunbathing and all that. We're tramping around doing a field trip. So, so it's very, very interesting. And the thing is about geology provides the history. You can work out which layer came first, which layer came second, which layer came next, and you can work out this order of the layers of the rock. Yep. And from that, the geologists make up a story. They'll say, there was a big river flowing here, and it brought in sand from here. And so they make up this story, but it's always over millions of years. And that's what you see on TV. That's what's in the textbooks. That's what's on all the tourist signs around the place. And so people have got no idea that what they're looking at is actually confirming what the Bible records, the enormous judgment on the earth at the time of Noah. So it's quite amazing. So that's what one of the reasons Creation Ministries puts out this stuff, and we do a lot of stuff about all sorts of places so that people can see how it fits with the Bible and how they can be confident that what the Bible records, not only about salvation and about Christ, but about the whole world, is reliable, and it gives people just a great deal of confidence in that way.
Dr. Taz, we sort of live on top of what they call the basin, I guess the coal basin, Sydney coal basin, and of course it's shaped like a big, I guess, breakfast plate. It's deeper underneath us than it is up in the Upper Hunter, where I was flying recently with a friend. We flew over some of the mines that are hugely deep. And even after all the rain that we've had, they're still not full of water, the ones that aren't being used anymore. They sort of just left them there. Hopefully one day they'll somehow fill them in. I don't know how they'll do that. But they're hugely deep. And even after all the flooding rains we've had, they haven't filled them. Regardless, this giant basin we have, if there were all these rivers that had, I guess, created this sedimentary rock and that sort of thing. Now, by the way, when I say basin, it is like a plate. It's round.
It is like a basin. That's right.
Yeah, and even out to sea, they're looking at sort of tapping into the gas, this whole PEP 11 thing. It's sort of on the outskirts of this actual basin. So I guess what the evolutionists are saying is that everything ran into the middle of this big basin. Where did it go from there?
Yeah, where did it go from there? Well, the evolutionists, it's actually a conundrum for them to explain the rocks in this basin, particularly the Hawkesbury sandstone. And they geologists normally try to say, well, these rocks were formed in a lagoon, or these rocks were formed in a river. They try to pick some sort of modern thing that people can look at. This was in a lake, or this was in an estuary. And they'll talk about that, but they can't explain the rocks of the Sydney Basin because they show much water power, as you said. And they covered such a huge area. The whole thing really destroys their basic assumption that it was just formed by modern processes. And so they really, they put it in their books, but I think they all realise that there's a little bit, their explanation's a little bit lacking.
Yeah. When you look at the deepest section being under the land, you sort of think, okay, so it all ran into the middle, and it just kept running into the middle. But how can something keep running into a basin and it's got no way out? A little interesting, that one. Yes. Dr. Taz, we're going to go into another little break right now. We'll be back very shortly. You're on 94.9. Dr. Taz on the line from Creation Ministries International, and we have a question for you which says, Hi, Dr. Taz. Many of us travel the M1 both north and south of the Central Coast. Question, what do we loom for to identify the volcanic rock amongst the sandstone as we see? What do we look for? By the looks of it, to identify the volcanic rock amongst the sandstone as we travel the M1.
Okay, so it's particularly noticeable down in the Illawarra region. There's a place called Bombo Quarry, which is a huge volcanic quarry in volcanic rock. So it's more obvious down there than it is up towards Newcastle. But in the Sydney area, there's volcanic eruptions have come through the sandstone, forming very large circular volcanic vents, which are filled up with rubble and filled up with volcanic rock, and they're often mined for the material that's in them. So there's quite a number of quarries throughout the Sydney region which are volcanic vents which are erupted.
Well, we see the sandstone a lot. We can see it's really obvious sort of sand in rock. What does the volcanic stuff look like?
The volcanic stuff is often black, not always, but it's often a black colour. I don't actually have a chart for the Newcastle area in front of me, but it's certainly. I might dig that out, get the name of it and a few of the places when I come back for next time, where people can just see that.
Well, that'll be next week. Yes. Now, I guess what you're saying is different volcanic areas can produce different volcanic stone.
Yes, that's right. And but the sandstones are incredible too. Like the sandstone in the Sydney area is a beautiful sandstone. It's very much desired for building materials, and there are a number of big quarries in the Sydney area that they cut it out like cutting out blocks of butter. Cut the sandstone out.
We've got a lot here on
amazing.
the Central Coast.
Yeah. So if you want to find out about the region, anybody wants to find out about it, they can just go to creation.com and look at, say, Sydney Basin, type that in, or sandstone, Sydney sandstone, or something like that. And they'll find articles about that sort of thing. They'll find videos about that sort of thing. They'll find there's a little booklets which were used in Creation Camp. They can find those and use those if they want to go into an area, say the Illawarra area, and look at particular sites. It describes them.
Yes, all righty. Well, Dr. Taz Walker, what an awesome week. It's been fantastic hearing from you, and of course you'll be back next week, which is exciting. So if anybody does have questions for Dr. Taz Walker, please send them through to our SMS line. So just text 0401 949 949. Thanks for those who have sent messages already. And Dr. Taz, thank you so much for coming in. It's been awesome hearing from you.
It's been awesome. It's been great, Mick. I've really enjoyed it, and it's nice to catch up with you and your listeners.
Yes, excellent. Well, we'll hear from you again next week, same time, same channel. It is 8:57.